Legendary sidearms with an unrivaled longevity of service, underrated and loyal servants spanning multiple conflicts, the most celebrated rifles in military history, and villainous gangster submachine guns turned signature linchpins of the US Army. This is Weapons of World War II, USA edition.
Jonathan, good to have you back on the channel. It's good to be back at the Armouries.
Brilliant to have you back.
And in front of us here, we've got a fantastic array of weapons belonging to the US Army during the Second World War. What have we got here?
We've got the Springfield 1903 A4 with a scope, so this is very much a sniper's rifle.
Yep.
Next to it is the new service rifle of that conflict, the M1 Garand.
Absolutely iconic.
I was just going to use that exact word. Overused, but I think not in this case.
Yep.
And so iconic I had to include a clip with inert rounds in it.
Yes.
And the Thompson, a whole range of variants there, of course. This is the M1. Also, dare I say, an iconic firearm. And of course, yet another iconic firearm on the end, the Colt 1911. This is the A1.
In the First World War, whilst they are introducing new weapons all the time, you're really looking at your bolt actions and perhaps some pistols. In the Second World War, we've got a wide variety within the Army.
Things have really expanded. Of course, the Colt is a veteran of the First War, as is the Springfield, but that's been adapted to not quite a new purpose, but an increasingly important purpose of sniping.
Of course. Well, without further ado, let's get on to talking more in depth about some of these weapons, and we're going to start off with the Colt M1911.
Originating as a result of a search for a suitable self-loading pistol to replace the variety of revolvers in service at the time, the Colt was designed by the prolific gunmaker John Browning, shortly before the outbreak of the First World War. It would go on to serve as the standard issue sidearm for the United States Armed Forces from 1911 to 1985.
Jonathan, the Colt M1911. Now, before we even go into the specifics of the gun, I want you to tell me, why is it so ubiquitous? I mean, when I think of any sort of video game and movie, you're likely to see this gun, especially if it's from that sort of 40s, 50s era.
I think it's the silhouette of it. It's just so cool.
Yeah.
I have to distill it down to that. That and the fact it's adopted by the US government. So it can be the good guy's gun and the bad guy's gun.
Yes, of course.
And it just has that, something about the lines. You can't necessarily call it art, but it's a beautiful piece of design, and it just looks right. Whether it's the goodies or the baddies holding it. And as soon as it starts showing up in those war movies and those gangster movies in the interwar period, I think that's where it comes from.
That's it, yeah. Gangsters, government officials. We're speaking about it in the context of World War II. Let's talk a bit about that. The US Army, at some point, they make the decision. They go from the revolver to the self-loading pistol. When does that happen, and why do they take that decision?
Kind of early on, in principle, so that they have not the final trials that will decide the new pistol, but 1902, they're conducting trials of quantities of self-loading pistols. They're looking at the Luger, they're looking at everything that's out, the Browning pistols, notably the Colt 1902, designed by John Browning, which is the ultimate ancestor of this thing. They're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater at that point. They're still looking at the current revolvers from Colt and Smith & Wesson, the traditional purveyors of such weapons, but they're already quite geared toward a self-loading pistol. That's the infantry. Mm-hmm. The US cavalry are very much, we want our revolvers, thank you very much. And it takes those several years, up to 1911, to kind of convince them that A, a self-loading pistol is the way forward, and B, that it's this.
And why do they think that this is the way forward? I mean, what we've got here next to it is the British Enfield revolver. They're sticking to the revolver during the Second World War. What is it about the self-loading pistol that seems preferable?
It's always hard to disentangle straightforward answers to these kind of questions, but my strong impression, it's rapidity of accurate fire, or potentially accurate fire. Pistols are notoriously, or handguns generally, are not notoriously accurate. But the big drawback of something like this, you have that very long, and this is not bad, to be fair, that's quite a good, what we call double action trigger pull, but it's enough for my muscles to start quivering very slightly, throwing off the shot. And with a short barrel, short sight radius, as we call it, the tiniest amount of movement translates to meters either side of your opponent. Whereas what the self-loaders do, all of them, the Luger, the Savage, and the Colt, they're the final three in the trial, it means you have to have it cocked ready to shoot, otherwise it's not shooting at all. One of my favorite things to annoy my wife with is, that's not even cocked. It's not even going to go off. But you have to have this ready to shoot. You have to load your magazine, insert your magazine, chamber around, and then apply the manual safety. And then it has this other manual safety, a passive safety, if you like. It doesn't shoot unless you grip it. So even with that off,
well, that's clever.
So once you've gone through all of that rigmarole, and this is something the US cavalry weren't keen on, they thought the safety could be knocked off too easily when drawing it.
Right.
Then you have a very light trigger pull.
Yeah.
So much lighter.
Doesn't shake as much.
And then it cycles itself. Every time, the energy stored in the cartridge cycles the slide between shots, and you can fire not only rapidly, because you can shoot a revolver accurately if you just spam that trigger really hard, but you're getting that lightness of the trigger with that rapidity of fire. For my money, those are the main reasons.
Yeah, not everyone is a Wild West gunslinger who's able to cock and fire the revolver really quickly, so that makes it really easy for the US infantry to fire quickly and accurately.
I think that's it, because there is only one round more than the typical revolver cylinder, only 7 rounds in this magazine. Having said that, the early self-loaders the US were looking at were in 38 before the whole caliber debate kicked off again, and that did give you 2 extra rounds. So in principle, the self-loading pistol gives you a high capacity as well, but how it boils down is you only get 1 more round. But 1 more round could make all the difference. If you find yourself in a gunfight with a pistol, 1 more round is actually really important.
Absolutely.
Fed into the Colt M1911 were .45 ACP bullet cartridges, thicker in diameter and height to the 9mm rounds that were used in other self-loading pistols at the time, including the German Luger and Soviet TT.
It is quite heavy. I can imagine it's once this is loaded, it's a fairly weighty gun.
Yeah, the bullet weighs a fair bit. It's 230 grains in old money, which is a substantial 15 grams, I think.
Right. Okay.
Times 7, plus the weight of the case, plus a bit more for the propellant and the primer. All things considered, it's going to weigh a little bit more than the service revolver that it's replacing, but not enough that most users are going to notice the difference. And actually, you have more weight up front, which is arguably going to make you a little bit more accurate, but then we really are into personal preference and skill and innate ability with a pistol, which a lot of people don't have.
Absolutely. And you talk about the stopping power. How does this weapon compare to the other self-loading pistols? As I mentioned, USSR, Germany, they've all got these self-loaders. How does it compare to them in terms of firepower? And how does it compare to the Enfield and Webley revolvers?
So Europe broadly sticks with that smaller caliber, higher velocity principle for pistols. The US was a bit off the pace there, arguably, but hey, 45 ACP still has its advocates.
And the longevity of this weapon, it's just absolutely insane. Introduced in 1911, and I mean, the conflicts that it goes through and it's used in its original form during the First World War, in this form during the Second World War, I'm guessing Korea,
yes.
Cold War as well.
Oh yeah, Vietnam. Crawling through tunnels with a torch and one of these things.
Yeah.
And it's in use all the way through. Well, 1985 is the nominal replacement.
Right.
With the Beretta M92 as the M9. So we're throwing back again, this time to the 1908 Luger round. That's what the 9mm is, but with a high capacity. So they're getting 15 rounds now. US Marine Force Recon in particular, I think MARSOC as well, are hanging on to, they're keeping these things running with new parts, off-the-shelf parts to keep them going. And in 2012, they buy a brand new 1911 under the designation M45A1, the close combat pistol. And it's this in desert colour with a rail on the bottom for a light or a laser or both. And it's like, well, the Marines are never going to give this thing up. But then as of literally last year, the final M45s were withdrawn. So it's not a very long service life for the final 1911, but overall, you're looking at well over 100 years.
It's had a good run. And listen, I'm excited. Let's give it a go on the range. Okay, Jonathan, so we've come down to the firing point, about 4 meters away from the target. Ear defenders on, and we've got the Colt aiming for the top target, semi-automatic, 7 rounds.
7-round magazine. Yep.
Do your worst. I'll tell you what, that's not a bad start, is it? You're right
bad.
on the money there.
Not too bad. I don't get enough practice to do much better than that.
Hey, listen, that is, I mean, you've pretty much got all of them on the target there, right on the bullseye.
Yeah, it's not, honestly, it's inherently pretty accurate. We're pretty close. The only downside to the old-fashioned one-handed pistol hold is you're going to get a little bit wary with 2 pounds of pistol hanging off the end of your arm. More so than if you had the modern two-handed grip. It gives you a bit more stability and maybe a bit more. I might have been able to close it up a little bit with a modern two-handed grip, but no one's really using that in combat. There's a reason why the 1911 survived so long in the civilian world as a competition pistol, because that straight back trigger, very crisp, short pull, short reset. It's great for military purposes, police, criminal purposes, but for competition as well. So that's partly why this thing has had the life that it has, because that civilian competition and self-defense world feeds back into the military, feeds back into the civilian, and sustains it to the present day. They're still being made, they're still being shot, they're still being carried, despite only 7 or 8 rounds in the gun.
I can see why.
Introduced just under a decade before the trusty Colt, was another loyal servant of the US Army. A design based off of the German Mauser Gewehr 98, the Springfield would go on to be used by the military throughout both the First and Second World Wars.
So Jonathan, next weapon, slightly bigger. We have the US Springfield rifle. Now, bolt action, does this get introduced as standard issue in the First World War?
Prior to, in fact. So it's introduced as a service rifle in 1903. Well, this is going to be the definitive US service bolt-action rifle. Cribbing a lot from the German Mauser, in fact, which is not a bad thing, because that was the world standard bolt-action in the 1890s. And so it's introduced in 1903, which means it's the de facto service rifle of the US forces in the First World War. The problem there is they don't have enough. So you end up with this two-tier system almost. Doesn't cause any huge issues. What you need is service rifles. They both work much the same way. And the other one is a British rifle.
Right. And fast forwarding to the Second World War, where is this used in the conflict? Who's receiving this? Is it the Marines or?
Well, this is the problem with, it's all very well inventing a new rifle or procuring a new rifle, but you've got to make enough to put in the hands of troops. And so the standard version of this, without this gubbins on the top here, is still around. You know, if you're not necessarily frontline US Army, you might well still have a Springfield at the beginning of the war. If you're the US Marines, who are not the poor relations in terms of combat experience and skill and the rest of it, but sometimes the poor relations in the procurement side, they've still got the standard infantry rifle version some of them almost throughout the war. But this particular variant here, the A4, is a specific version for snipers. And so this is issued only to the platoon sniper. There's one sniper in every platoon.
And talk to me a little bit about this scope. It looks very different to the scopes that we see nowadays. It seems like a very small diameter of the scope itself.
Yeah, so it's not as though scopes that look a bit more like modern scopes didn't exist. No. But this is this was not their first choice, but the other choice couldn't make enough of them.
Right.
So we end up with the Weaver. This is the 330. This is a model 330, as it says on there.
Yeah.
Great big plate on there, but it's very slender. And really, don't think of it like a 12 power or 20 power modern sniper scope with the classic shape of a scope. It's really closer to a modern combat optic.
Right, okay.
So in fact, even then, it's only 2.75 times magnification.
Right, okay.
It's not even the 4 power of a German sniper scope, which is only the same as a modern ACOG or an Elcan or something like that.
That's very interesting. Okay, so they're not even getting a huge advantage in terms of what they can see.
It's a huge advantage over iron sights.
Of course.
And you get a bit more in the way of light gathering. When it's dusk or dawn, you can be out doing stuff that you couldn't do with iron sights. You've got a single point of aim to worry about, not two. But yeah, a lot of sniping was done just with iron sights, with non-sniper rifles by potentially non-snipers. And in the First World War, an awful lot of sniping was done by the designated snipers with just iron sights, because the scopes were not always that great or that helpful.
You mentioned that the German sniper scopes tended to give you greater magnification. Does that not put these snipers at a great disadvantage?
If you're looking at your classic movie sniper duel, absolutely. In reality, you're going to play to your strengths and rely on fieldcraft to get a bit closer, or you're just going to take... I mean, bear in mind, we're not necessarily going for, T-zone headshots every time. We're going for probably centre mass. A bullet anywhere in the body is going to be a problem. So we'll just put it on safe. That's the safety there, that wing device there. So hand it over to you now.
Over to me, okay.
So keeping it pointing down the range.
All right. Now I always know I want to be leaning in when I'm taking this shot.
Always leaning in.
Always leaning in.
And when you're ready, push up that wing safety up and over the top till it's on the left.
Okay, so it's ready.
Yep, and then you're ready to fire your first shot, and then you go on and fire the remaining 4 at your leisure.
Here he goes. So just aiming just below the red dot.
Keeping that muzzle level, that's it.
The bolt and action feels a lot smoother than the Enfield, actually.
Oh, controversial.
Controversial opinion.
Good.
One more.
Pressure of the last round.
Pressure of the last round. I think it's also the goggles steaming up as well.
Probably doesn't help. It's a little bit warm today.
Yeah.
Okay, so just hand that over to me.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's pretty good.
Yeah, I
First
can't
time
really
out with that
see.
weapon.
I'll push up my goggles, but...
You've got a group of 4, and then that last one you pulled off to the left a little bit, rushing it if you're anything like me.
Yeah.
A little bit.
I think also once you fire the 4 rounds, you start to feel the weight of the gun a little bit more.
The longer you're in the air, the standing position is the least accurate. So
Yeah.
that's a good reason why it was, prone is preferred.
Really? Okay, so most soldiers, if they could, to get more accuracy.
To take cover, to be less of a target, and then to deliver more accurate fire.
Despite its continued efficacy as a solid service rifle, the Springfield was replaced before the beginning of the Second World War, with what many still deem to be the defining infantry weapon of the 20th century. The M1 Garand was adopted by the US Army in 1936 as the first ever semi-automatic rifle to be used as a standard issue service weapon, and was produced over 5 million times throughout the Second World War.
Jonathan, the M1 Garand, arguably the most iconic weapon of the Second World War.
The finest battle implement ever devised, according to General Patton.
Right, okay, interesting. Well, tell me a bit about the backstory behind the introduction of this into the US Army.
So coming out of the First World War, like most nations, the Americans realized that some sort of self-loading rifle at some point was desirable. So the Americans had a series of, well, a whole development saga from the 1920s with one John Cancius Garand, who's a Canadian, joins the US arsenal at Springfield, the famous Springfield, where the previous rifle came from, and works on in earnest on a new rifle. There's then a rival from Pedersen, which is similar size and weight and everything, but it's pretty clear. Looking backwards, it's pretty clear that this was going to win. It just ticks all the boxes.
Again, we must mention that there are other nations, the Germans with the Gewehr, the USSR with the SVTs, but the US are the first to introduce a semi-automatic rifle as standard issue?
Correct, yeah. The first in the world to adopt a self-loading rifle as a standard issue rifle. And of course, it takes a few years to get enough of them made, but you certainly, as far as milestones go in the history of firearms, it's a significant one.
In the Second World War, the British, the Germans, they're still using their bolt actions. How does this compare to the bolt action?
It just blows it out of the water completely. Like, the difference between this and an automatic weapon, a fully automatic weapon, is far less significant as far as actual combat use, and certainly on the bigger scale, than the difference between a bolt action and this. It's night and day. And that scales all the way from the user, who's like having to work the bolt, and guys got extremely slick at doing that. Famously, the British Expeditionary Force in the First World War, they're flicking that bolt back and forth and scoring hits. But that's the point. You have to train around that limitation of manual operation. This thing uses the gas produced by firing the cartridge, taps it back, taps it off, and drives a big old piston to recock and extract, eject, and rechamber, as well as recocking the mechanism. Does all of that stuff for you.
We can't mention the M1 Garand without talking about the ammunition and that iconic ping sound it makes. There's so many myths around it to do with the fact that the Germans, they'd know when the US soldiers had to reload because they'd hear the ping sound. Some people say they couldn't hear it. Talk to me about that myth.
Well, there is the clip. Now, obviously, the basis of the myth is not the whole full clip flying out of the gun. The theoretical problem is this. So if I just...
Right.
That's a rubber floor.
Yeah.
It does make a fair bit of noise when it comes flying out of the gun. Is that a problem? Short answer, no. It's not a problem. So this develops as a sort of a meme of the period, pre-internet meme.
Yeah.
It may have its roots in one or more guys who were in some sort of eerily quiet one-on-one situation, popping up and engaging each other, and someone's gun went dry and ping, and that enabled the enemy. This is usually associated with the Pacific, so the Japanese more so than the Germans. So we can't discount that from happening. It may be the origin. It may have been dreamed up in a pub somewhere, or a bar, because it's just not that plausible. If it ever happened, it's not a realistic concern for you as a soldier. There's so much other noise going on. People have done experiments. Mike Burns over at Bloke on the Range, have a look at that. He shows how even in a range environment, you can't really hear it when there's any amount of other noise going on. This is a deathly quiet room that's just gone.
And talk to me just about the actual mechanism itself. So what happens with once the soldier has fired 8 rounds? How does it all work?
So we'll see this when we shoot the thing, of course. But as far as the operation goes, you lock it open like this. We won't do it with this, but you just insert that clip of rounds there.
Yeah.
And then either the bolt will send its own way forward, or you assist it with the heel of your hand, and that slams forward. You put it on safe if you want to put it on safe, which you would have to at the time. And then, that means to shoot it, all you have to do is put your finger in the trigger guard, flick the safety out of the way. You might argue that's not the best way to do a safety now, but it was great then. And you're straight into the firing, and 8 rounds as fast as you can pull the trigger, with as much accuracy as you as a shooter can bring, with an excellent set of sights, and they're eminently adjustable as well, for windage and for elevation.
Right.
Soldiers love this thing.
An immensely popular rifle used right up until the height of the Cold War and sporadically beyond, it was time to find out for ourselves if the Garand's acclaim was justified by taking it to the range.
Okay, Jonathan, I'm excited for this one, the M1 Garand. We're going to fire one 5-round magazine, and then we'll do 8 afterwards. But we're still going to hear the ping for the 5-round.
We are, yeah, because obviously we fired 5 rounds out of the other rifles, so we're just going to do the same, just to see what the results are.
Yeah.
And then we'll do the full 8 rounds.
Fantastic. Well, go wild.
As satisfying a sound as you're ever going to hear. I just had to hear it again. This time I was giving Jonathan permission, not that he needed it, to unload a full magazine as quickly as he could.
Bottom target. That was, how did that feel?
I don't know if I've actually fired a Garand that fast before. It's, yeah, I felt like I was in good control, but then the more if you try and run the trigger, you can get ahead of yourself quite easily. And what you would always want to do is keep a good sight picture.
Absolutely.
And not fire faster than your own limits as a marksman, which I was starting to do towards the end.
And you realise you get through the round so quickly. Has it impacted on your accuracy?
It definitely has.
Yeah.
It's like 3-4 times the size there. It's just, if you're going that fast or faster, if you have more skill than me, you're putting lead between you and the enemy, essentially, or keeping heads down. That's the real value of this. In an American squad, you don't have access to that ready belt-fed firepower. You are your own suppressive fire with this thing.
And that's the thing, it's your choice, isn't it? If you want to be really accurate, you're not going to be firing at that rate. If you're covering fire, then you might want to pop them off a bit faster.
That's absolutely the value of rapid fire, but you're still going to want it to be better aimed than I can do.
What a privilege that was to see that being fired.
From a weapon with an iconic sound to a firearm with an iconic look. The blowback-operated, selective-fire M1 Thompson submachine gun first burst onto the scene in 1918. The Thompson, or Tommy gun as it became known, gained notoriety as it became synonymous with the gangsters of the interwar period. Men such as Al Capone and Bugsy Siegel. Avoided by many nations for this reason, the impressive performance of the Thompson led the US Army to adopt and use the weapon throughout the Second World War.
So, Jonathan, when I think of the Thompson, I'm imagining Al Capone's gangsters, Valentine's Day, with the drum magazines. But of course, this machine gun plays a really big role within the Second World War for the US Army. Talk to me about the origins of submachine gun warfare and where this fits into that story.
This kind of does go all the way back to the origins of the submachine gun, but the Americans didn't quite get there first. The Germans did.
Of course. Yeah.
So right at the end of the war, the only submachine gun that we know of to see actual combat or even substantial issue is the Bergmann MP18, Maschinen- und Pistole, which is just another term for submachine gun. The term submachine gun was invented for this thing, and it's only slightly later in concept, 1919. So Colonel John Thompson decides he wants same kind of reasoning, really. One of the nicknames for this thing, a trench broom. So we've already got 2 names there, submachine gun, less than a machine gun, less powerful than a machine gun, but still automatic. And trench broom, which is kind of intuitive. It's sweeping the trenches with automatic fire. But yeah, the design is not as mature. So 1919, all we have is prototypes. And it's not, when this thing is finally ready for the big time in 1921, with that big drum option available,
Of course, yeah.
there are no armed forces that want it. You know, peace dividend, everyone's bankrupt as well, so there's no market for what is quite a niche weapon. Incredible for the trenches of the First World War, but very few planners are thinking we're going to go back to trench warfare ever again. You mentioned gangsters, and I dare say, whether it's a British commando or a US Marine in the Pacific or a US Army soldier, they're going to think of them, and they did think of themselves in that same way.
Right, yeah.
You've probably seen that photo of Churchill.
Oh yeah, of course.
Not the criminal aspect of being a gangster, but the coolness. So they didn't think of themselves as criminals, but they'd seen all the movies just like we have, more of them probably.
Yeah.
And so that really did feed into the mindset and to the procurement, in the sense that that's what stops the Brits from acquiring a submachine gun until they really realise they need it, because they literally call them gangster guns.
Yeah.
So the individual soldiers were like, yeah, I feel good with this thing. The guys in charge of buying them were like, that's not the done thing.
Right, so there's a bit of a taboo around it, right?
There is in Britain. The
Okay.
Americans are much more forward thinking. It's just that the requirement's not there until they see the way the world is going in 1939, and of course joining in 1941, by which time this is the only credible option for them as well.
Yeah.
But they're able to ramp up production and equip.
But when it gets introduced into the US Army, how does it differ from that sort of Tommy with a round drum magazine? Is that totally taken out of the equation? You mostly see them with this long magazine rather than the drum.
By the mid to late war period, yes. So this is a 30. So it does stick out a little bit more than the 20, which the logic originally from Auto Ordnance and Colt, who made these things, was you either want a nice compact 20 rounder flush with the grip here, or you want that big firepower option with a 50 or even 100 round drum on there. But it was found in actual combat that a good old compromise is 30 rounds, and about 30 rounds is standard. It was standard on the Bergman when it was adapted to this style of magazine as well. It's the sweet spot. It doesn't stick out too far, but it gives you enough firepower without having to reload. Because of course, if this thing goes dry, as it were, you're not going to get the magazine changed quickly enough, potentially.
And how many of these are they producing, and who within a unit is being able to use this? When I think of this gun as, apart from just the gangsters, I think of Tom Hanks' character in Saving Private Ryan. He's the captain. Was it usually the officers who were given the submachine guns, or did it depend?
Not as such. So the standard US Army issue weapon for an officer would broadly be the M1 carbine.
Okay.
So the M1 carbine is more prevalent. These were issued out on a sort of mission basis. So if you could blag your squad a Thompson, you would, and you'd give that probably to the point man in a patrol or whoever you think is best.
Is that because they're more expensive to produce?
I mean, certainly early on, you've got limitations in how many of these they can make, but I don't think that's the reason. I think it's just that it's seen as a specialist weapon.
Okay,
we need to clear that pillbox, get Private Jones out there with a Tommy gun to clear it out. Not quite as simplistic as that, of course, but mission specific. And they think that, but don't forget, we have the M1 Garand rifle, which is a lot of firepower. It's carefully aimed shots at distance. It's rapid aim shots, potentially from the hip.
Yeah.
So my perception is they don't quite see the need to issue these en masse.
Okay.
More than it is cost.
In 1939, Time magazine called the Thompson submachine gun the deadliest weapon, pound for pound, ever devised by man. But I wanted to find out just how accurate a statement this was when considering its effectiveness throughout the Second World War.
How does it perform on the battlefield?
It's kind of in the middle of the field when it comes to rate of fire, albeit most of them are much lower. So most of them are 500 to 600 rounds per minute. The Soviet Papasha is upwards of 1,200. This thing is about 900. So certainly in its M1 or M1A1 configuration, it's about 900 rounds per minute, which is pretty fast.
Yeah.
So you've got probably, let's say 30 rounds, 20 or 30 rounds, and if you've got the drum, 50 rounds at 900 rounds per minute or 45 ACP pistol ammo, it's certainly going to make you feel like you're having an effect, and it's probably going to make the guy in front of you feel like you're having an effect as well. So it certainly has the soldiers think it's great, and I think they're mostly right as well.
Yeah.
The only complaint is likely to be the weight.
Right, yes. And I remember, I've fired one of these before. You do feel it, like you say. You really do. It's a lot of metal.
Yes, it's old-fashioned. So this looks quite rugged and militarized, and it is the rugged militarized form of the weapon versus the 1928 model, which is beautiful blued steel and polished walnut. This is a bit more rough and ready. We've got rid of the fins on the barrel, which brings the weight back up a little bit. We've simplified the bolt mechanism and moved the cocking handle to this side, but it still performs pretty similarly. You can no longer fit the drum to it with this model because they're just not buying them anymore.
And I mention performance because at some point in the war, they make the decision to move away from these and they start producing the grease gun.
Yes.
When does that transition start happening and why?
1943, middle of the war in the bigger picture, they realised that these really are too expensive to produce. Well, it's not even so much the expense, it's the time taken to make each one, but that is tied to cost. And so the Americans do something similar to what the British have done with the Sten gun, something made out of sheet metal and, well, in the case of the Sten, tubes and sheet metal, which is inherently cheaper as long as you've built the factories and tooling to do that. It becomes, you can knock them out in a lot less time at a lot less cost. The cost matters in terms of the resources you're using more than it does the unit cost, because it's a magic money tree in wartime to some extent. Yeah. But they want the cartridge. They want to keep the 45 ACP cartridge, partly because they have a load of it already and they're making more all the time, and why change it? And it has that perceived stopping power relative to, say, 9mm. But you don't need, you can make something a bit lighter, a lot cheaper, a lot quicker to make. May not look as cool. It may not be that gangster gun from the 30s,
Yeah,
but
of course.
yeah, that's the way they go with the grease gun. So these see service all the way through the war, just about everywhere, and they'll be jealously guarded and retained by the soldiers that have them because they love them. But it's the grease gun becomes the standard submachine gun by the end of the war.
Well, I love it, and I want to see it fire. So enough chit chat. Let's go and aim at some targets with it. Iconic weapon, M1 Thompson. Off you go whenever you're ready.
Great.
So to start with, we're going to show that it's semi-auto. It has that functionality, and then we'll go to burst fire.
Yep. See, I've just fired on the bottom left dot there. I'm in very close range, but capable of a certain amount of accuracy. So we'll now go to full auto, do a series of short bursts. Yeah, I mean it's a heavy old gun, but the sort of ergonomics of it, the geometry of it, the butt plate's much lower than the gun itself.
Yeah.
So you do have to kind of anticipate. You can see it
Just.
it's wanting to rise. This is why they developed the cuts compensator that's on a lot of, especially the gangster era Thompsons, and actually on the M1928s as well.
Yeah.
To put muzzle gases upwards to help bring the muzzle down, and that's why, because it levers itself up in your shoulder. Obviously, if you've got some muscle,
Yeah.
that helps.
Well, obviously those 45 rounds clearly give it more of a kick.
Yeah, to an extent, you're putting more mass that way in a rapid string. So, I mean, that's basically why it has that much recoil, despite being a big old heavy 10-pound beast. So yeah, 9mm is going to be more controllable. But it's still, you know, with a bit of practice, I mean, that's not too bad from,
No.
what, 3 meters, 4 meters away. They're all on the paper. I can't do better than that for you.
Can't complain. Well, let's see how you fare firing off this thing as quickly as possible.
See if I can do.
Holy moly!
Yeah, well, I have the advantage of being extremely close up, and even then we have got a couple, one's clipping the edge of the paper, one is off the paper. The problem with firing automatic with anything, especially something like this, is it's going to shake your vision.
Yes.
And it makes it harder to control, and then the rest of it is muscle and technique. And
So you're almost like not looking down the sights anymore, you're just trying to keep it in the same rough position.
it's not destroying your vision, it's just making it harder to maintain that sight alignment, sight picture. It's more of a general guideline.
Yeah.
Fine at this range, you can see why you would go for short bursts as a rule, because they give you the best of both worlds, more rounds, but with a bit more precision than empty. And of course, if you empty your weapon, you've then got to perform a reload, and that could be problematic.
That's true. You went full Captain Miller there. But what struck me was not only the rate of fire, it's a lot quicker than I expected actually in person, but also the fact how quickly you went through those rounds. It doesn't take long. It's what, a good 5 or so seconds?
Absolutely, yeah. This is, you know, people talk about it being a slower rate of fire than the earlier Thompson, and it is slower, but it's not slow.
No.
It's still about 900 rounds per minute. Yeah. But you have the weight of the weapon to help you.
Yeah, and I can't even imagine it went quickly with a 30-round magazine. I can't even imagine with a 20-round magazine.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean,
I would like the foregrip. I want
Yes.
the vertical foregrip of the 1928 or the 21 model, ideally. But they didn't have that luxury.
Jonathan, that was a lot of fun. What was the standout weapon for you, having shot them?
Well, I suppose I should say any fun experience was strictly coincidental. This is a research exercise that we're engaged in here.
Of course.
But no, it obviously is quite fun. Remembering, of course, what they're for, what they were used for. It's difficult. You know, the Garand is legendary. I rarely get to shoot one of those, so 8 rounds and a ping from that is always
Iconic.
a treat. I probably did the best job with the 1911, and that's also iconic, so let's go with that.
Yeah, well, put it this way. If you're a US soldier entering battle, what do you want to be equipped with? Do you want the submachine gun? Obviously, it depends, but...
That's a different question, isn't it? Yeah.
If you've got a choice. I mean, my bet would be the M1 Garand. Having seen it used, it does everything you need it to do. And it's reliable, and it's the best of all worlds, I think.
Yeah, as much as I enjoy pistols, they're not that significant. Like if you're having to use a pistol to fight with, something has gone wrong almost by definition. The submachine gun is fantastic, but it's limited to that 100 meters. You can annoy people at 200, maybe attack a group of the enemy with it, but that's not really what it's for. So yeah, I would tend to swing around and agree with you. And this is the benchmark for one of the 2 species of infantry rifles after the war.
Yeah.
But it's so good. Like if we're limiting ourselves to the 1940s, and I only have to pick one weapon, I agree with you.
You're going to go for the M1 Garand.
I think so. There's a weapon in its own right, in its period. It's fantastic.
Well, it was absolute pleasure watching you fire these weapons and firing the bolt action myself. An M1 Garand experience overall. Had to get there in there.
Thanks for watching this video on the History Hit YouTube channel. You can subscribe right here to make sure you don't miss any of our great films that are coming out. Or if you are a true history fan, check out our special dedicated history channel, historyhit.tv. You're going to love it.